This is Morning Express, and thank you for joining us this morning. And it is Thursday, the 11th of February 2016. On a Thursday, for those of you that might be familiar with the show, we have what we call the State of the Nation. This is where we put our hands on the pulse of the nation regarding matters or issues that really matter to the nation and what direction we should take as a nation. And today, we want to focus on corruption. Because corruption is one thing that we've talked about this year, I think, more than any other time. And when we talk about corruption, figures have changed from millions to billions, and soon, who knows, we might get to trillions. But it's a question that we must ask ourselves as Kenyans as to whether we really fully understand corruption. Do we want to get rid of it? Because we are very quick to say our leaders must get rid of corruption. But the question is, we as the society, we as the fabric of this nation, do we really want to get rid of corruption? Because corruption does not only happen at the top level, although they say the fish rots from the head. There needs to be a discussion and a debate for us to fully understand what really is corruption. I'm going to introduce the panel very, very shortly as we begin. But first of all, let's just look at some of the happenings that have been taking place in this country in the not too distant past in relation to corruption.
We will hold our anti-corruption bodies accountable now going forward, and that there is no sacred cow in this government, none, including myself. There is none. I have no right, no authority to call a minister, to call a permanent secretary, to call a chief executive, to tell them to award a contract to a particular individual. There is a process. Everybody must know that if you hold that office, you must do things in accordance with the law, not in accordance with pressure of people who are calling you atifanya hii fanya ile. Wewe mwenyewe ndio utakuwa held accountable. Ukifanya, ujue wewe utafungwa peke yako.
On the area of corruption, after we heard the brief from the EACC, that 70% of all real and perceived corruption are in the area of procurement. And we agreed that together, therefore, we need to work and come up with a framework as to how we were going to deal both with real corruption as well as perceived corruption. And we agreed that in a week's time, the team that we put together, comprising both members of government as well as members of the private sector, would come up and give us a brief, a strategy, a plan of how we shall work together to see how we overcome that challenge.
A challenge that the president admits we have as a country. And of course, as the head of state, well, one would expect that he would have the machinery and everything that needs to be done for him to deal with corruption. But is he able to when the rest of us maybe don't participate in ensuring that corruption is gotten rid of? Let me introduce the panel this morning. And to my immediate left, I have Honorable Moses Kajwang, Senator for Homabay. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning to you and welcome. We also have Honorable Irungu Kangata, who is Member of Parliament for Kiharu. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. As we go along, we are expecting Javans Bigambo, who is a governance specialist at Interthoughts Consulting, and he will join us as the show goes on. I understand there's a lot of traffic given that the weather has suddenly taken a change and it's raining. But let's get to the subject matter here, and I'll start with you, Honorable Moses Kajwang, on your definition of corruption.
Thank you, Mike. Corruption, the typical definition, is the use of entrusted power for private gain. So you could be entrusted with power, you're in the private sector. You could be entrusted with power and you use it for private gain. You could be in the public sector and you're entrusted with power, you're a chief, you're a cabinet secretary or a permanent secretary, and you use it for private gain. So corruption are those actions taken by people in positions of influence to benefit their own pocket.
With your definition, where then would you put a citizen who bribes a policeman?
Because sometimes the citizen bribes a policeman to get something personal out of it, because there's sometimes there you are talking of bribery. which is one form of corruption, where there is a giver and the taker.
Right.
Now, the taker sometimes is using their positions of influence. I'm a policeman, I'm a traffic policeman, and you've got a cracked headlight, so I'm using my position to benefit unduly. Now, someone else also, because they want to get off the hook, they end up participating and abetting that crime. In fact, in all forms of corruption, there are always two sides. There is a perpetrator, and there is the other side that facilitates that act of corruption.
Okay, so in short, what you're saying is that corruption would be like a heading, but there are many other small little subheadings of what corruption could be. That it could come under bribery, could come under influence and use of power or abuse of power.
Yes.
Okay. To you, Honorable Irungu, what is your definition of corruption?
Well, my definition essentially marries with what my colleague has said, but the only issue I would add is that we need to categorize forms of corruption. And to me, I categorize by saying we have what we call big-time corruption. This one is where the leaders play a very key role, that is politicians, cabinet secretaries, people who hold key positions of power. And then we have the small-time corruption, let's say the police officers, together with the motorist, the lands registry, the court registry. So that one probably the value, and the categorization probably is based on the value. The first category, the big-time corruption, is where millions of money is involved. And then this one we are calling small-time corruption. The impact is the same, but it involves relatively smaller amounts of money.
Okay, but doesn't that mean that the principle basically running the two are the same?
Of course, the effect is the same, the negativity is the same, and but the only difference is the issue of remedies. What does it take probably to tackle the big-time corruption, and what it takes probably to tackle the small-time corruption?
Okay. Honorable Kajwang, in regards to now the definition that you've given, one then would ask the question, is corruption in this country a cultural misnomer? Is it something that we have grown up feeling and knowing is just the norm?
In fact, I would say it is a crisis. We've got a crisis in this nation, Mike. Less than a month ago, the East African Institute released the Kenya Youth Survey. The most interesting findings that you've ever seen. Young people between the age of 18 and 35, a majority say they would like to get rich irrespective of the means. They say they don't mind being corrupt, provided they are not caught. They say in the next elections, and I think the number was 40%,
right,
they don't mind being, in fact, they would vote for the politician who bribes them. So going back to the point, is it a cultural thing? It is appearing as if it is a cultural thing, but it is a crisis. Mike, the most corrupt people in this country, if there could be any order, sometimes we tend to say it's the police and the judiciary. But the political class is one of the most corrupt classes in this nation. And what fuels it? Public expectations. Meaning that there is a culture in this nation that when you're in a position of influence, you're supposed to take advantage, milk it to the maximum. When I am elected as a senator, the expectation is that I should have a lot of money to take care of funerals, to take care of fundraisers, take care of school fees, and all other sorts of philanthropic activities. Where the money comes from does not matter. And if I do not produce it, my opponent, who could have been a beneficiary of corruption, or who could be an entrepreneur, is the one who will be taken seriously. So I think it is a sad thing that issues of corruption and worship of people who have acquired wealth by means that are not very well defined is becoming acceptable. It's becoming a culture. In my view, it is a crisis that needs to be dealt with.
Given what you have said, isn't it then the political class that is creating that impression through maybe the promises given during campaign time? I will do this, such that when now you get into office, you're under a lot of pressure to do it by hook or by crook and ensure that those things are delivered to your constituents, because again, you need to come back in office.
It could be a cyclic thing. Is it that the politicians are promising too much, or is it that the populace is expecting too much?
But
I think it's a little bit of both. that we politicians, when we go to the public fora, we tend to do some very ostentatious display of wealth and opulence whose sources cannot be ascertained. We have this thing called declaration of wealth, which is another mockery that this nation undertakes. In fact, this country has got very good rules and policies and regulations around this thing called corruption, but implementation is really nonsense. We members of parliament, we are required to declare our wealth, and it remains a secret. And if you divulge it, it is an offense, which you can be fined, you can even be jailed.
Right.
Why then declare when you're not going to make use of it? Because I got into the Senate 1 year ago. My wealth then and my wealth now, one, it should be something in the public domain, so that people can be able to see that in this 1 year, and looking at the salary that I get, has my wealth increased 10 times? And if it did increase 10 times, then I must demonstrate that, yes, I've been doing some entrepreneurship to increase my wealth 10 times. But if I'm walking to Monica Juma's office to get brown envelopes, or walking into State House to get brown envelopes, or going to SGR to get tenders, then the public should be able to find a way of arresting it. So I think we need to also get back to the issue of the very many laws that we have, the very many regulations that we have, and make sure that they are workable and they are implementable.
All right, this is Morning Express, and this morning we're looking at corruption and just trying to see whether as a society, as a culture, it is something that we have imbibed and agreed to just passively have happening amongst us. As much as we demand our leaders to stop corruption, are we really willing to have corruption end in this country as a populace, as a society? And let me take this opportunity now to introduce Javans Bigambo, who is a governance specialist and also at Interhouse Consultancy. And thank you for coming. I understand there's a lot of traffic out there with the rain, and sorry about that, but thank you for joining us. We've started by defining corruption, and maybe we could also get your perspective on your definition of corruption.
Well, there are very many ways that corruption could be defined. There's a way that maybe the statute provides its definition. There is a way that the common mwananchi looks at it. But basically, I think, in my own understanding, that is the unofficial understanding, would be that corruption is the exercise of influencing with the intention of making gains or accepting gains from someone for purposes of benefiting from something that either you are due to, or you are rightfully supposed to have, or otherwise. So basically, it is making gains from something or influencing something so as to get gains from something or from someone from a particular office in a manner that is not justifiable or acceptable.
Okay, Honorable Irungu, let me come to you and look at it. Honorable Moses Kajwang has mentioned that there is machinery, there are laws in place that supposedly would deal with corruption. As part of the government, what is the problem? Why is it not being dealt with per se?
One, it is because the way I think the philosophy which underlines those laws is not a good philosophy. It is a philosophy of punishment.